You are listening to Tech Reads, interviews with emerging technology thought leaders. Our sponsor is SoftTech, the premier technology trade association that has been serving northern Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo County since 1997. Our mission is to create SoftTech moments where people connect, explore ideas, and create new business opportunities. Learn more at softec.org.
Hi, this is Brian Schwartz from Tech Reads, the podcast sponsored by SoftTech. We're very grateful to SoftTech and all the sponsors that make this possible. Today, we have Don Maruska with us and a couple guests as well, so we'll get into that. But why don't we just do quick introductions. We'll start with Eric here joining us at Office Hours, who was gracious enough to host us. Maybe just introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Eric Sargent. I'm an urban designer and a SketchUp pro. So SketchUp is a software that I teach people how to build, essentially imagine and build the environment that you want. And my interest is what kind of environment are we building, both now and obviously later in the future. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thanks, Eric. Samantha, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me. My name is Samantha Jewel Pfau. I am the author of a book called Be Decent, Environmental Activism 2.0. It came out a few years ago, back in March of 2021. But essentially, I'm an author in addition to being an activist and a climate change aficionado. So I'm very excited to have this conversation today.
Well, thank you for joining us. And Don Maruska, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm a serial entrepreneur by background, starting companies in Silicon Valley, 3 of them that were applying new technologies to healthcare delivery, financial technology, et cetera. My skill is figuring out how to take the pieces of something and make them successful. And I created a boutique venture fund there and with several companies that went public. We moved down here 30 years ago, and since then I've been helping other people be successful in their careers. And throughout that time, I've been very interested in the environment. And in 2003, I began organizing groups to work on how could we enhance the marine environment off the coast here? How can we resolve some of the issues that come up when you're trying to plan and develop new things that impact the environment? And that led to my writing How Great Decisions Get Made, process for solving really tough issues. And then I wrote Take Charge of Your Talent, how to make the most of your talent and have fun doing it. And then after a trip to Iceland with our daughter, I was in the ice caves in Iceland, and those are formed when the glaciers melt and the water runs through and under the glaciers. And they're magical places to be in, but they really connote the death of the glacier, because when that glacier melts enough for the water to run under it, that water acts like a saw and really cuts through the glacier, and it's losing like 45 feet of glacier a year. And when I was there with our daughter, I was just thinking to myself, I can't let these changes happen without doing everything that I can to make a difference. And that prompted an effort into figuring out, well, what's the problem with climate change? Why is it so hard? What can we do about it? What are the choices? Can we solve it? And what would be the nature of a solution that would work, because we're not getting a lot of traction on it. So that's the research that led to the book. And with the assertiveness that we can solve climate change now, we need to do what's necessary to mobilize the people action involved to pick up the solutions that are available and to put them into practice.
And so Don, he's published several books, and he's a business consultant, well-respected. He's worked with lots of companies on the corporate side. But this was a diversion from kind of the books that you typically write. So what inspired you? This is the book, Solve Climate Change Now. What inspired you to kind of commit a big chunk of time to something that wasn't really aligned with your typical consulting practice? Am I right?
Mm-hmm. Well, like I mentioned, I have been working on environmental issues for about 20 years, so that is not an uncommon domain.
No, it wasn't.
But the issue was really, okay, is there something new and fresh to add to this conversation? And so what I really spent some time thinking about is, well, why is it so hard to solve climate change? And it really brings up a number of things that are critically important in terms of how we find a solution. Because climate change, humans are really structured in their thinking and in their evolution to deal with acute problems, like the lion attacks you and you run away or you kill the lion or whatever. And so we're wired for that. The amygdala, the lizard brain, as some people call it, fires off, the adrenaline hits us and the cortisol kicks in, and we get this burst of energy to respond to this challenge that's in front of us. And that's the predominant form in which our minds think and work, in that sort of structure. And that's why we sort of swat at problems, because we have that quick knee-jerk kind of reaction. And the problem, that works well with, you're walking in the street and the car's coming at you. You can't just ponder, well, what are my choices here? You got to take some very quick action. So it still has an evolutionary and a biological and social value for us to think in that way, but it doesn't work for a chronic problem. And climate change is a chronic problem. It took us 170 years of the Industrial Revolution to get into the problem. It's going to take us several decades to get out of it. So it's not something we can just swat at and say we're one and done, which is what humans like to do. It's something we have to stick with. So you have to come up with approaches to this problem that enable humans to change how they're responding to it, to think differently, to engage differently. And that's really the critical nature of, well, how do you bring change on chronic problems? We have all kinds of chronic problems in our society. We've got obesity, we've got, diabetes off of that, we've got heart disease, we've got a lot of chronic problems, and they're sapping our economy and our health. Because people aren't figuring out how to deal with them. Well, what's critical to solving a chronic problem is to engage somebody's self-motivation, because that's what's going to keep them in the game for the long haul, is if they're self-motivated. People will do something because somebody says, oh, you got to do this, you're going to die. And they'll do that probably for, a week, a month, or whatever, but they're not going to do it joyfully, and they're not going to do it in a sustainable way. So we have to come up with things that are going to connect with people's self-motivation, and I'll describe how we do that around climate. The other thing that's challenging about climate change is that as humans, each species has its own predominant way of sensing the world. As humans, our predominant way of sensing the world is visually. We put a lot of emphasis on seeing things. You do that in the built environment, you do it, in whatever environment you're working in, it's sort of seeing it. If you don't see the problem, it's not in front of you, it doesn't get solved. So in the 70s, we solved the problem of polluted air in the United States with the Clean Air Act, because people could see pollution. They could see the yellow and brown in the skies of LA and say, oh, we got to solve that, because every morning it would be right there in their face. Well, we don't have that with greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide is a naturally occurring gas. The plants use it to create their food and create oxygen. So it's something that's a natural problem, but we don't see it. In fact, there's a very interesting art exhibit in Houston, of all places, the center of the fossil fuel world. And the title of the art exhibit was, what if greenhouse gases were orange? And so people painted, what it would look like if greenhouse gases were orange. Well, greenhouse gases and the excessive amounts of greenhouse gases that we're pumping into the atmosphere. And the problem is we continue, despite knowing that this is our undoing, each year we're adding more. So we're not bending the curve, as we were talking in the COVID times, we got to bend the curve. We're not bending the curve, we're adding to the problem each year, and we're not really solving it. So we don't visualize this problem on a day-to-day basis. So we have to have other ways in which we can.
Well, until there's like a weather event, then
until there's a weather event,
it starts talking about, well, the reason why this is the worst 100-year storm is because of climate change. So people are personally affected, and then all of a sudden they're interested because it impacted them directly. In California, of course, the fire that we deal with, Newsom always says, this is part of the repercussions of ignoring this issue.
Yes. And that does work for a while, but again, humans have a very short kind of action-reaction kind of thing. You know, it's not like somebody pulling a gun and shooting somebody and you see, okay, he did it and that was the result. It's sort of like, oh, the impact of climate change really feathers out through a lot of different interactions and causes the net results like these extreme weather events. And people say, oh yeah, but it's not like it's right in the moment that it's doing that. So we have to have better and more effective ways. In fact, that's one of the groups that I write about in the book, Solve Climate Change Now, is Nerds for Earth. And these are techies that in essence are using their techie skills to help people visualize the problem and visualize solutions in ways that they can
make an impact,
understand and respond to. So there's actually a very important role with all the things, you know, big data, data visualization, all the trends that are happening, all the things that you simulate now with CAD, CAM and everything else of what your built environment is going to look like, you know, for your transportation design, et cetera. And you even probably drop people into it to show what it would look like, you know, from their vantage point, et cetera. So those are all things that are evolving in the tech world to try to help people visualize things more effectively. So that's one of the ways in which climate change can really benefit from just one sector of the tech world. There are many others that can apply to it as well, but it's an interesting opportunity. And that group got formed because it's people, hey, they wanted to make a difference on climate. It's important to them. They have skills, but they didn't know what to do with them. So the people who had climate problems or were working on climate problems came to them and said, hey, can you help us create a data visualization here? You know, and can you help us do that in a compelling way? And can you link in resources so that people, when people see that, they can see, oh, immediately something they can do. So there's a big opportunity, which is why I'm delighted to be talking, you know, to my longtime friends in the tech world about this, because there really is something very important to do here, and critically important for us to tap the kind of skills and abilities that you have and others have in addressing this issue. Because many people, you know, climate change is so overwhelming, they kind of wring their hands and say, oh my gosh, you know.
Well, and I think it's even becoming a sort of tiresome conversation that people are kind of, sad to say, but it's like we sort of have moved on. Well, haven't we? Were we talking about this 10 years ago? And well, yeah, it's becoming more important than ever, but I don't know how you continue to bring this up as an important topic that has been discussed, but there are some new solutions that are being proposed. I mean, and it's depressing when the spin on basically it's a polarized political topic too, right? So now you've got, well, if you're associated as a liberal or Democrat, then maybe you're more earth friendly. And if you're really hardcore Republican or on the right, you know, you don't believe it. On the extreme case, you don't even believe that climate change is something that's real. And it's almost like your political affiliation in some ways predisposes you to don't cross that line, because you're no longer considered on the right side if all of a sudden you're a Republican and you're bringing up that. So part of it is just it's a political issue that has been just created this bigger divide that people are now, sadly, I think that people are afraid to speak up because we don't want to get into that political, like you versus me and your
messy environment that we're in.
I mean, there's a lot of new dynamics that I think what I liked about this book was that we each personally have the ability to start making some different choices, and it doesn't have to be a hardship.
No, and we don't have to wade into the political environment to do
that
it.
Out. Yeah, the planet is not political.
There's a role for it, but you don't have to go there. You know. One of the things that I think describes our polarized political environment effectively and the difficulties of making change through that is the adage, you know, the only person who wants to be changed by somebody else is a wet baby. People will change, but they want to change on their own terms. They don't want to be pushed.
The more you tell me to change, the more I'm going to do.
Right. The more that we tell you that you have to change, and you have to change in this very specific way.
Yes.
The more people resist that. It's just like trying to get cattle to go down a chute. I mean, they'll do anything they can to get out of that. And humans are that way too. So what I've learned is that effective processes for engaging people can overcome personalities and politics. And so, for example,
keep you focused on the issue.
Keep you focused on action, because action is ultimately the antidote to anxiety. So people don't want to be anxious. So that's why they will avoid being anxious by avoiding a topic that makes them anxious. So if we just keep talking about the topic and people don't feel a sense of agency, that is an ability to make a difference, they will just at some point disengage. Because in essence, what we're doing is we're feeding that lizard brain, and people say, I'm burned out about climate change. Well, and in some respects, literally they are, because our bodies, when we're fearful of something and then we shoot down that adrenaline, the cortisol, those powerful chemicals, they're so powerful they're actually toxic to our organs, and we can only withstand them for a short time, and then our bodies have to clear of them, or we will literally burn ourselves up. So when people say, I'm burned out about X, Y, or, climate change, in some respects, they're actually biologically accurate.
We're wired that way.
We're wired that way. So they have to get out of that way of thinking and into something else.
Let's give it a new name.
Right, or they won't get there. So I found that it's really helpful to just engage people. If fear drives this primordial reaction that we have that's so limited in its effectiveness for the chronic problem, the antidote to fear is someone who's in a hopeful state, not a Pollyannish state about the world, but a hopeful one, like, oh, there are things I can do. I have some agency, some ability to do them and make a difference. Those things, that action is the antidote to anxiety. And that's where we need to be engaging people. And when you ask them about what their hopes are for a healthy climate future, you actually fire up different parts of their brain. Instead of getting that lizard brain fired up, the lizard brain's there, but it's kind of just balanced. You get the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive function of the brain that figures out, okay, how are we going to organize ourselves and how are we going to work through this? And especially the cerebral lobes, which come up with our creative ideas. Those are the brains that we need. So part of this is about how do we engage our better brains for better solutions. And that holds true for climate change and for a lot of other things we do. When you're planning a transportation change, there's a lot of people who will react to that and say, oh my God, you're changing how I'm doing, and they're fearful, right? And you get a lot of knee-jerk reactions, people who are otherwise pretty thoughtful and pretty balanced, but you get them in a public hearing when you tell them they're going to, move their cheese.
We're going to take away that lane. That's the hot topic right now.
We're going to do a roundabout, or we're going to do whatever. Right. So I'm like, God, it's like, there's a lot of things in this discussion that actually apply to other dimensions of our lives, but we want to keep focused here on what's happening with the climate. So I thought what I could do is I could kind of lay out, how do we navigate this chronic problem? What are some useful approaches? And then what I'd like to do is take 15, 20 minutes to actually try this out with one of you, unrehearsed as it is, and show you a way you can have a climate action conversation with somebody about actions that will be productive and successful in their efforts. So,
well, hang on before you do that. Samantha, are you still there? Oh, we just lost her. I was going to ask her to chime in. If she comes back in, I'll take a break on that. But I think that's great to give the listener a tangible takeaway from this conversation, and that's not something we always do. So, Eric, if you're up for it, I would love for you to be the subject.
Perfect, actually, because I'm listening and I'm enjoying it, but at the same time, there's so many points I want to chime in, because it gets the wheels turning. And this is being an urban designer, I chose this career for this reason. So I have to do something, and it's like, how do I put my skills to use? How do I do what I love and still feel like I'm earning a living, but I'm doing it what I think of as a good way that ultimately benefits not just
a greater purpose.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And then the thing too with landscape architecture and urban design, unlike say architecture or product design or things like that, you get the results don't come right away. For example, a building looks its best on day one.
Mm-hmm.
A garden looks its best on year 50. You know, because it takes
time.
So this idea of already is landscape architecture, time is built into the process.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a little bit of a unique perspective, but I would love to see how that sort of thinking connects with people that don't have that necessarily, that training, that background.
Right. So let me lay out the basic construct of this.
Please.
And then we'll dive in and we'll do the conversation.
Sure.
So part one of the book is about starting with what you love to do. And so you've got to kind of clear your route towards this. And there's a number of different things we look at. Okay, how do you get focused on your your hopes rather than your fears? How can you turn your fears into hope in a practical way? So that's kind of the mental path. There's a freedom sort of element to the path, which is thinking about, well, what's really important to me, you know, and is it all the things that I have, or is it a quality of life? You know, many people talk about sufficiency being the new abundance. You know, it's how can I have a sufficient amount of things versus how can I have, you know, more toys than anybody else? The old Silicon Valley license plate holder, you know, he was the most toys wins, which has gotten us into a terrible place from a consumerism point of view. And then how can we employ behavioral techniques that enable people to change their behavior without, you know, making it a philosophical arm wrestle? So that's the first part of the book, and I'll give you a bit of an experience with that as we do the climate action conversation. The second piece of the book is, well, how do you marry up what you want, what you love to do, this thing that's going to be self-sustaining for you, with what needs to be done. So I have a simple model I call it the AAA model for climate health. It's like AAA, people help you out, you know, when you're stranded on the side of the road. This is how to help out the climate. And the AAA is awareness, action, and advocacy. And people can come into that cycle at any one of those points. Some people say, oh, I've really got to understand more about climate change in order to feel comfortable figuring out what I want to do. But a lot of people say, you know, okay, I've heard about it enough. I just want to do something. You know, they're action oriented, and people are more comfortable in that space. Then people say, hey, you know, I know all that. I know what I can do. I've been doing what I can do, but I need to make some bigger wheels turn, and that's advocacy. So it's awareness, action, and advocacy. My experience is people can drop in anywhere in that cycle, and they will, like, if they start taking actions, they'll start becoming more aware of the impact of their actions and how that can make a difference. And then that also leads them into advocacy, because they say, okay, I'm doing all this, but now who are the big contributors to climate change, and how can we get them to take action? And one of the things that I found when I worked in the US Senate years ago was that elected officials get people coming to them all the time saying, you know, this is the big problem, solve it, you know, and they come in day in, day out with that. And what really made a difference is when constituents would come in and say, look, we care about this problem. Here's why we care about it in human terms. Here's what we're doing. And now here is what we need you to do to help leverage that or move that further along.
Okay. So
it's, you know, elected officials, when people, you know, they complain about the UN conferences on climate and why didn't the leaders have more ambition, you know, for solving climate change. Well, the leaders only really do what their constituents demand of them. Very few elected officials actually start a parade. Usually they look for a parade and they run around to the front to join it. And so we can make a big difference by having that impact. And so those three things, and you can pick any one that you wish, and it will make an important contribution. And that's an important element of giving people choice. When people have choices, they feel empowered. They don't feel like somebody's trying to ram them down a particular path, and they can find their way to get there. And it also is, it can be non-political. You know, I'm working with the community here to plant trees. Well, we have some people who are planting trees primarily because it's a great way to sequester carbon. We pick trees that do that. Like a mature live oak tree will have converted 3 tons of CO2 into living carbon in the soil, which is great. And increasingly, you know, landscape architects and all are thinking about, okay, how do we carbon farm our landscaping? So there's a great opportunity there. But other people come and join us because they just love trees.
Well, increases property values. There's no doubt.
Yeah, there's property value. It's shown to reduce temperatures in the summer, and the temperatures are getting hotter. And so there's multiple reasons people can come to that without all having to say, oh, we all sign on to the dogma here. And by virtue of that, we're now all taking this action. So I found that it really dramatically expands the ability to attract people into any of those domains, is to let them find their own path. And then the third part of the book is, okay, how do you take what you love to do and how do you take what needs to be done and look at that intersection? It's like a Venn diagram, if you're thinking of that in sort of tech terms. You know, the Venn diagram is where they intersect. That intersection is their climate sweet spot. That's where what they love to do marries up with what needs to be done, and therefore has the sustainability to carry it forward and to be effective in doing it.
That's what I found.
Yeah, there you go. There's the Venn diagram. Yep, exactly. So the book helps people figure out how to navigate that and how to get there.
Sure. All right. Well, I love the idea of doing something that the listener can also take on themselves. So let's do this action conversation.
Right. So I'll just keep track of the time here, but it'll be about 15 minutes or so. It depends on what we get into. So we'll try this out with you, Eric. This is the climate action conversation. So we start with, Eric, what are your hopes for a healthy climate? What comes to mind about?
Well, I mean, for me, it's one in which we don't feel like we're giving everything up. I mean, we went from, you know, obviously with the Industrial Revolution, and now we've got electricity and cars that zip us around. We kind of think technology and energy, therefore, that powers technology is progress. And I think that the big thing is, I think, this idea of what constitutes thriving and what constitutes progress. And so a future that sort of scales things back in terms of our consumption and our energy and our resources, but doesn't do it in a way where we're setting ourselves back. You know, we're down in the mud, things are difficult, we hate our lives. You know, it's this idea that, it's almost like we still need to be chasing progress, right? So we can't go back in time. We want to go forward. So for me, the thing is getting to that spot where we we live like we used to a long time ago, but we don't do it by going back to that point in time. And I'll give you an example of what I mean a long time ago. I don't mean millions of years ago. I mean pre-industrial revolution. I mean, look at the amazing cities in Europe. For example, I studied in Italy. So there's little, Tuscan hill towns that are all built from local material, that are all walkable, the buildings are still there 400, 300, 500 years later. And, you nurture things like community, there's safety, there's agriculture.
There's no 4-lane highways up there.
I mean, that's why people go to these towns. They're beautiful. Obviously, some are struggling. You've got populations that are leaving. That's a different story. But for me, I look at that model of the village, which is not just less resource intensive, but also supports things like bringing people together. When you're walking places, you're running into people, you're more civil. You cut somebody off on a highway and flip them the bird, but if you bumped into somebody in a crosswalk, that same person, you would say, excuse me, most of us would. And that's just the difference of not being in the enclosure of the car. So it's a multifaceted goal, but which is where it gets challenging, especially even for me, when I feel like I know a lot of these things, it still feels overwhelming because there's so many aspects that are interconnected.
So one of the things we're going to do through this conversation is help bring some focus to that, because focus is always our friend. Focus helps us apply our energy in ways that are going to make the most difference for ourselves and for the cause that we're seeking to pursue. So what I'm hearing from you, and one of the things that's important to do in this climate action conversation is to reflect back what you hear from somebody else. It's a very powerful way. Active listening is a very great tool. It's a way to acknowledge what the other person has said. It's a way to help them hear how their ideas sound. And to also evolve their thinking, because I might reflect back what I thought I heard you say, and you might say, well, that's not really what I meant. What I really meant was X or Y. And so it enables the conversation to get deeper, richer than just, oh, you said your piece, you know, and then we move on. So what I'm hearing from you is the hopes that you have for a healthy climate in the urban design world that you work in is you want to have the kinds of quality of life, the quality of social interactions and commerce and activity, but you want to be able to do that with a less energy intensive, especially a less greenhouse gas generating type of approach. So you're looking for how you can get to that, how that can happen. So you're not feeling like you're going backwards in quality of life, you're actually going forwards, but forwards in a more sustainable way.
Yeah, exactly. For example, walking is something where you feel like you can look at it two ways. It's like, well, it's going to take you longer. But it all depends on the context. You know, here in San Luis Obispo, we've got parts of town that are really walkable, and you will walk a whole mile and you won't notice. But then there's other parts where you're walking along Tank Farm Road, for example. Nobody really walks on that road. It's not designed for that. And so this idea that if you made somebody walk, but you didn't design for walking, they're going to see that as a step down. I don't want to do that. It's uncomfortable. It's exhausting. It takes me longer.
Dangerous.
Exactly. But, let alone speeding cars. So for me, this idea that to be able to flip the context around where we're actually that walking now, I feel better. Got fresh air. Got exercise. Stopped and talked to somebody. This thing that somebody thinks is taking your car away is actually giving you
a new experience
actually in return. And that's the way that I see it. But of course we all see it through our own lens. How can we as a society share more of that perspective?
So you're looking for how to create this win-win, a win for the human experience,
connection
and connection, and a win for the for what's needed for a healthy climate. Okay.
And overall increased quality of life, right? Because that's that is the one thing that SLO is grappling with is growing, but then fewer cars. So that I think there's a theory that will improve the quality of life here, despite a town that is continuing to grow in population.
So we're going to move on now to the second question in the conversation, which is, well, what is it that you love to do? So, Eric, what do you love doing? It could be in your work, or it could be in your personal life. Or it's the sort of thing what we're trying to do is find the things that have sustainable self-motivation. So for a good way to test that is, you might be otherwise exhausted from your day, but people will go home and they'll pursue a hobby, or they'll work on a project, or they'll do something because it's so compelling to them that doesn't feel like it's draining them. It feels like it's energizing them. So what kinds of things are like that for you? What do you love to do?
Well, I like to draw, and I think you mentioned this earlier. I was going to comment, but I'll bring it up now. Is that people do like they need to see things. You said visual people primarily. Of course, we've got these other senses that we could tap into more. And in architecture, we use the term visualization, which just, it's a pretty broad term, but it's essentially drawing an idea so that it can be conveyed. That's pretty much what I do is I take what I like to do, which is draw anyway. I doodle in my school notebooks during class, and just the hand is always kind of busy. It's, okay, well, how can I like to draw, so how can I turn that into exactly, I think, your Venn diagram, which is what am I drawing then? Because I could be drawing lots of things. I could be drawing shoes and selling people sneakers. I could be drawing comics and be selling people books. But for me, it's really important that if I'm trying to build healthy communities and make communities walkable or transit oriented, that I'm able to show people exactly what it is that we're trying to do. And so that's hand drawing, that's computer modeling, that's rendering, it's all of the above.
Yeah, great. So those are the things that you love to do. So we're going to move on to that second domain here, which is, okay, what needs to be done for a healthy climate? So as we think about, building awareness of climate change and the opportunities to take action, that's one of the A's. Another one is taking action directly on something. And the third, advocacy. Which of those, and you could play in all three of them, that you're not limited, but which kind of most directly appeals to you is, oh, that's kind of how I like to play? Which of those domains of the AAA would you start with?
Well, if I was just start, I mean, I feel like awareness
at this point.
Awareness came first for me. It was like, I need to absorb as much material as possible. Like, there's a book on this, I will want to read it because I want to make sure that I understand it before I go tell somebody else, hey, here's something, there's a book I recommend, or here's something I want to try. So the awareness really is something that's ongoing, but it really feels more foundational.
Okay.
And then action is the tough one because it depends on that time, the scope. We have to, I'm only one person. I think we all struggle. What can I do?
Right.
In your short life.
In my short little time period, and even that is like, what can I do that makes it, that even gives me some feedback that says, hey, this is the right direction.
Sure.
And then the advocacy part, I know you asked me to pick one, but I'll try and settle on one answer here, is there is a next generation. As I get older, I realize that it's like, wait a minute, I'm aware already. I'm putting some stuff into action, but now there's this whole group for students, Cal Poly, for example, a whole group of students that are coming online. And it's like, okay, how can I use what I know and what I've done and start putting it in, almost like planting little seeds, the landscape metaphor again. Putting it into their curriculum, even if no one's asking me to. So that they can, as they're going through, they're starting to think about these things as they graduate and become professionals themselves. So I guess all three. I'm doing all three. But if I had to pick one, I don't know. I feel like the advocacy is the one that may be the more important because I feel like if you can plant 100 seeds, if I could do one project, I maybe help one neighborhood or one street. In a year. But if I can plant, 100 or 200 little seeds with people that are out there doing something to help their communities.
Sure. So for this conversation, do you want to land on advocacy for a moment and explore that? Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to do what in Silicon Valley they call a mashup. In Silicon Valley, very rarely do they do anything from scratch. They take something from here, something from there, and they put it together. They do that with software all the time, which is why software tends to be so kludgy because they've taken an app from here and an app from there and put it together and try to make it work. But it's a fun and fast way to do it. So we're going to do a mashup here of your love to draw, design, and thereby visualize things, and an interest in providing advocacy for a healthy climate. So we're going to start with what comes to your mind, but then one of the things I found really valuable is that this is like a little, mind meld here. We can get other people focus group, people's points of view. So what comes to your mind, Eric, as you think about, oh, okay, I could take my drawing and visualization capabilities and marry that with advocacy for climate. What pops to your mind? What do you think of as possibilities that could mesh those two?
Well, I mean, I think I mentioned it, but education is one. We're teaching skill sets that are specific to other people who can hopefully visualize ideas, of course, that can be used in the wrong direction or the other direction, but hopefully that's something that empowers them to be able to communicate their ideas, whether it's this neighborhood urban garden or whether it's a street tree project, this idea of being able to show people what it is that they envision. I think that's passing, again, that sort of skill set on is really important. We can stay with that one, or I can come up with some other.
If you have others that come to mind, go ahead and riff on them. And this is brainstorming. So
well, the other thing is coming up with like I find helpful because I'm pretty analytical or literal. So like when someone creates something that's like a guidebook, like a roadmap, so I could use this skill set of visualizing things to create you know, whether it's a book or whether that's an online resource or something that basically says, here's what this is, here's why this is important. Like Jeff Speck has walkable city rules, for example, you know, takes a big idea, but breaks it down into
something
something like simple and bite size. And then of course, attaching the visual to it, I think is a way that will get people that maybe are non-designers, non-climate advocates, or people who are also feeling overwhelmed and where to start, giving them something smaller that they can sort of quickly understand.
Yeah, and they get it in a picture right away.
Yeah.
Versus, I mean, fewer and fewer people, this is the sad story for authors, fewer and fewer people are reading books. You know, there are a lot of books out there, but
all their attention's on these devices.
Yeah, their attention is on a device, their attention is on something that gives them the idea fast. And
video,
a sketch or a video or something is various drawings of something, you know, can be a very fast and engaging way for people to learn about.
Well, and for visual storytelling, I can tell you that, so my wife and I have one of those Lomi devices that breaks your food waste into something that you can recycle without the stink and the smell and all the drawbacks that come with actually composting if you don't have a garden. And we notice every week we have at least 1 or 2 fewer trash bags in the trash can, like the regular trash can. And if you were to create a visual of, this is a year of how many trash bags you would have used if you weren't composting, and here's a visual of how many trash bags you actually used, I bet you it would be pretty dramatic visual for people to be like, I should be composting because over a year, this is significant.
Right.
They don't think about it because they're just dumping one thing. That's an orange or a banana peel, right? I'm throwing my apple core in there. It just cumulatively doesn't look like much as you're doing it, but visually, I was just thinking if you were to sort of show a picture, I think that would get people to like, I mean, I think that the people who are trying to get us to compost need to have more visuals so that we can see that instead of just giving us something that said, here, you have to start composting.
Yeah, right, and what am I going to do with this little bucket?
And you're going to find, supposedly, if you don't compost.
That's your issue of the challenge that you see in your work of how do you get people to appreciate value over time, you know?
Yeah, and it's also, that's something that's kind of invisible. Like you said, the apple core by itself is a small thing, but it adds up, but that's time. And so this idea, that's basically data visualization. You can count the apples, right? And you're putting it into a graphic that way. But it's revealing something, maybe it's a pattern or maybe it's an impact or something that isn't seen. But then there's 2 ways to do it. Just, hey, don't do this because it's bad and it'll show you the visual. But then there's also the one that says, well, I want to actually steer you towards something. So instead of saying, don't do, here's some information, don't do that. We don't like to be, yeah, I know, no one likes to be told not to do stuff.
Right.
It's, you know, to have something, I think about it like a challenge that you choose to embark on is way better than one that is put on you. That's not, I'm butchering that.
Well, that's exactly back to our opening discussion about the 2 different brains that we can engage. You know, there's telling them people you can't do it. Their first thing is, what do you mean you're telling me I can't do it? Where does it say I can't do it? You know, they start getting all legalistic or huffy or whatever. But if you're saying, oh, here's something attractive, you know, like, oh, look at this is what that compost would do for your garden. You know,
exactly. Some people just don't want the numbers. They want to say like
ignorance is,
they see the garden and the flowers, and they don't care how it came to be, or they don't care where the resource material that sort of helps make this thing come into life or help keep it healthy. It's just that's an extra level that some people and don't care about, and that's okay because, like you were saying, we meet people where they are, and so trying different visual strategies so that we can kind of see which ones respond, which people respond to which one.
Yeah, or giving them a choice and saying, hey, look at there's 3 great things about having this composter, you know.
Don't show them what they're taking away, show them what they're gaining.
Which one appeals to you? And then, you know, we get 3 different ways of visualizing it that, and sometimes people love doing something and we'll talk about it with their friends and say, oh, you know, I'm doing this you know, it's got 3 benefits, you know, and they get excited about all 3 benefits. Somebody else might say, oh, the only one that appeals to me is this one benefit. The other 2 I either don't agree with or, think it's some politics or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's neat. So thinking about this talent you have for drawing and visualizing things, thinking about this advocacy component, what do you think would be an immediate way for you to get a taste of marrying those up and making a difference? What is small or big way to just dive in?
Yeah, this is actually something I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is sort of, I just started a meetup group, which is a sketching group, doing something that I like and sharing it with other people. Right. And actually the most rewarding, it's not a class, we just meet and draw. And so in that way,
that's
it's
a good example. You're doing it because you love it.
And then it makes me realize it's like, well, wait a minute, they're coming too because they like to draw together, right? It's not a class, it's not, right. It's just show up and sketch. And it's really a simple idea we're building, a community around people who like to go around town and draw stuff. So kind of using that as like an example, I would want to think about what does a visualization community look like? What is a group of people who want to do exactly what we're talking about, which is say, yes, I have ideas too, and I would like to learn ways to express them.
Yes.
So that then I can communicate better with my city council, create a poster, my school project, my parents, we all know the power of a good visual.
Sure. Pictures worth 1,000 words.
So many people, I don't want to call it propaganda, but advertising works for a reason as well. Think about all the great campaigns.
Sure.
That's storytelling in a way, and it's also done, the best ones are almost they're the simplest ones. And I think that so how do you mix those two? This is a great question for you and for this conversation. How do you take those? How do you bring those together?
Would you be interested in a couple of ideas?
Sure.
And this is actually sort of what this online community, Nerds for Earth, does. Is they find folks like you love data visualization, like doing it through hand sketches. Okay, what are the problems that are out there for the climate that need to be dealt with? But something to anchor just very locally, because you've talked about the local environment, is, as you may have seen, the City of Slow now has the Sustainable Slow theme, and you're seeing it around and they're featuring it. So one opportunity is you could connect with those folks, Chris Reed, the head of sustainability for the city, or others, and just say, hey, look, what are you trying to help happen? And how could our sketching visualization abilities help that? Because, they found that a lot of these, they do it with, maybe if you've been on the beach, you've seen the snowy plover signs, the first snowy plover signs were very government oriented, thou shalt not,
do not
enter this space with snowy plovers, and people say, flip it off, and they take their dog in. But then they got kids to draw pictures of snowy plovers and the eggs and the fledglings and all, and they put those up there. And people responded very, very differently. So because that was, these are our kids that have these hopes for their life and the future, and I want to align with that. So that's an example of flipping which brain gets engaged. So there might be a lot of opportunities like that could be fun, and you don't have to think of what's the best place to apply this, because there are people who are already out there that are working on climate change, know what they're trying to accomplish,
and where the resistance is, and where they're running into some snags. Like right now, again in Slow, it's how they put in these bike lanes that it's causing. First, it was the parking, which now they're saying the motive for that was to get cars off the road. And now the pushback is on the bike lanes that they basically put all over town. And they say the motivation for that is they want fewer cars on the road. Like there's an intent behind it, but it's not being delivered to the public. And now there's this fear that they're actually going to wind up ripping all of those bike lanes out. Like they're going to overcorrect the other way. So you to step in and show this visual of, listen, we're a village. We need to maintain this quality of life. We're a growing city. taking out a lane is actually better for quality of life. The biggest fear is on South Higuera. They're talking about taking the 4 lanes down to 2, right? And that's a lot of traffic on that road, but the city intention is probably that they want less traffic. So
Well,
what does it look like?
Yeah, you may find, that's just for instance, there are other groups that are out there for example, I'm working with the Slow Climate Coalition, which is another great group. They're actually they meet what is it, the 3rd Thursday, at the Ludwig Center at 6 o'clock. They give you, they include dinner. Dinner is, interestingly, gleaned food from
Local farms.
Local farms and from local grocery stores, where it's hit the Best Buy date,
yeah.
but it still has value, or the grocery stores figured out it can't sell all that by the Best Buy date, so it's making it available. So they actually feed you from that, which is an interesting story in itself. But that's a whole group of people that are working on all kinds of things. I've worked with a bunch of the climate fellows. These are people that are at Cal Poly. You may have heard the College Corps group. I don't know if that's come to your attention, but there's 40 of them that are working on climate issues and helping the community get connected. And they're trying to figure out how to do that. Well, I've worked with them to help them develop 5-minute videos, short, compact videos about key topics. Well, there's a whole bunch of other things. There could be visualization things that would be a way to have that, have more enduring, as I would call it, legs to it, and there's ability to stand.
I think signage is a big thing.
Signage.
You mentioned the snowy plovers. It's amazing what the right sign will probably create. Yeah,
and how the right signs can go viral. People aren't going to take pictures unless they're on the dark side of the government sign, and send it around, unless they're sort of on the theme of, well, look what they're trying to do to us now. But they'll take pictures of I was there and look at what these kids are doing about snowy plovers, and that'll get around. So that would be of interest as I'm thinking about it, because I'm seeing these videos are good, but people see the 5-minute video, but then how does that last in their memory? And if you had a visualization that sort of, like we just did, recycling was one, and composting was a different one, and you had some visualization of that could be like a poster that we could have up at every monthly meeting that would be in people's minds without them, because they don't want to watch the same 5-minute video again.
Or the perks of having less. That's, you were talking on that earlier, is that,
right.
Can you visualize your house with less stuff in it? That you, are stepping away from consumerism, but then you feel better because you have all this space.
You're uncluttered.
Decluttering is actually it produces endorphins.
Yeah.
We feel better when we go into a place. So I think visually telling that story is like, well, here's what it will look like, a clean office or a clean house, whatever. And I mean, that's what Joe works really hard on in this space, is keeping it. He doesn't like things being left out and cluttered around, and you can't bring stuff in that doesn't fit the,
right, the
current design. And
yeah.
So, but I do think there's a lot you could do with.
So this is an example of this climate action conversation, and it's an example of how, if you do it with other people, people can see things, see opportunities, make connections with personal experiences they have to enrich the ideas and to expand it out. So just to wrap up this conversation, I'd like to ask you a couple questions. One, what's something that you would like to do from this conversation to make it actionable for you, whatever step that might be? And then we'll have a little debrief about what the experience is like of having the conversation, but that's a process question. I'd like to first tie off for you. How would you like to start? What's inspiring to you at this point? Not to push you to do anything, but what's calling to you out of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you connected some dots through the various questions. If you put them all together, there's a sort of a evolution or a storyline just in this conversation about, you know, what's your vision of a good climate or a improved climate or whatever, and then two, what are your passions? What are you good at? It's like that's, I think, bringing all those things together so that I understand my story maybe a little bit better first, and I have something to start having conversations with other people, you know, along with some of these questions too. Active listening, reflecting back to them, this idea of looking for small, you know, looking to make connections, you know, for starting points so that they can so they can feel like whatever their idea or their passion is tangible. And then we talk about community. So this idea, one thing that's for me personally would be to sort of crystallize my story and my message. And then the second thing would be to look for the opportunity to partner with people, which is you mentioned the city. We also mentioned some groups in town too.
Right.
And start to understand some of their needs a little bit better.
Being seen as a resource for them to come to when they need some good visuals to convey to the public, this is what the bigger picture is. Yes, you might be seeing it this way, but let me show you what it looks like on the flip side. I do think the city has a good long-term vision. It's just how they're implementing it isn't being done so well. It's getting a lot of friction because they aren't conveying, you know, they've got the people who support all these ideas, but then they've got a growing group of people that are opposed,
being pushed. You know, rather than attracted. So that's the key thing in this and what the book really highlights is an attraction model, because the push model can only work for a certain amount of time, and then there's
run its course.
The attraction model is like a magnet. You know, magnets stay potent and powerful, you know, just because of the strength of their attraction. So yeah, so great. And if I can offer you some connections to people or whatever, I'd be delighted to do that, so that you could have a warm introduction to people who would be interested in what you're doing, or if you want to join in any of those meetings or groups or whatever. And people, you've got a real distinctive skill, and you have a strong desire for an image and vision of a future that you want to work for, and so there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I appreciate all your help here. I mean, I'm like you said, the attraction model. I've been overwhelmed in the past, and oh, you know, it's all negative, it wears you down. And then just one day you realize, like, no, I'm going to move towards the things that, you know, we want. Visualization is only one aspect of that. That's just the visual component of it, but more of a mentality, more of an attitude of like, hey, you know, we can do anything we want. Like that's what creative people think. We like to break rules. We like to do things different. We can do whatever we want. And I think that's a really powerful way to think about it. And so getting together with the people who think like that too, who are energetic and positive and optimistic about where we're going, when the news articles and the data are really kind of telling you the opposite story. That's what I'm looking forward to. More of that,
drawing people with what they want versus what they don't want, or what's resisting. And when you talk about engaging designers or people that are drawing, sketching, whatever, and making that part of your curriculum, it just brings to mind that maybe an effective way of doing that with them is for you to draw something that illustrates to them what you're inviting them to do. You know, in other words, by your example, you'd be able to show them, oh, this is how I visualize a future where, you know, we have high quality of life and we're able to do it in a sustainable way.
And a highly connected community.
Then people would rip off of that and say, oh yeah, I see what you're doing, but I'm gonna do it a little different way. But they'd have something tangible to look at.
Yeah, exactly.
Inspired by your efforts to share your climate sweet spot, if you will, of the drawing and the advocacy.
Yeah, I know there's more people out there that I just have to find them. You know, we all have our tribes out there, the people who are like, hey, this is the approach I would like to take. And I'm in a situation where I've been doing this long enough where it'd be great to, yeah, to empower them to take action as well, whether that's something as simple as a poster, or that's a data visualization, or that's a 3D model that shows what this parking lot might become someday instead of the parking lot, which is what maybe not the thing we need the most right now. I know that that's not what most people say, because we actually need parking, but it only, again, that's the world we built. We need it because we built it that way. So if we build it
there's a whole lot of
differently,
assumptions in there that didn't have to be that way, but we made them.
we made it that way, and we can unmake it, and we can make it different.
And what works back then doesn't work today. That's part of the issue, is we can't live the way we've been living is not sustainable. You know, in the 80s, I grew up in the 80s, and this was the era of excess, and it never really let up. It just morphed. Right. And in some ways, we're even more in the era of excess.
Right. Because now progress is having more stuff, but cheaper.
Well, and the manufacturers have figured out that they can obsolete things and make more profit.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, the sad thing with appliances and the amount
of fast fashion is a huge one.
Yeah, disposable things. So anyway, we're going to wrap it up. Don, why don't you just share a little bit quickly for our listeners, if they want to learn more about you, and pick up a copy of the book.
So a great way to do that is, the book is Solve Climate Change Now, Do What You Love for a Healthy Planet. There you are. We're all holding them up. Thank you. And it's available on Amazon. It's available as paperback. It's $15 on Amazon. It's set the price that would be reachable for people. It's a few bucks if you get the digital Kindle version, which has its
climate benefits.
And if you just want to learn more, there are a lot of free resources and information available at solveclimatechangenow.com.
Cool. All right. Thank you. And thank you, Eric, for being part of this.
Yeah, thank you both.
Thank you for listening to Tech Reads, sponsored by SoftTech. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe and share it with your colleagues. If you have comments, questions, or want to suggest an author for a future episode, visit SoftTech at softec.org and click on the Tech Reads link.